A very warm welcome once again to all of you. This will be our final plenary session, and the idea is that the coordinators of the breakout sessions will report about what we've already heard were very lively discussions. We were told there was not enough time to look at everything we wanted to look at. Now, two of the coordinators have already been introduced this morning, so I will be very brief. Nick Balthazar, director, presenter, writer, award-winning filmmaker. Barbara Debusschere, award-winning journalist, has been working for the Morgen since 2001. She looks very youthful, but she's a roue. She knows what it's all about. And then we have three younger gentlemen. We have Lorenzo, Terrière, who is currently working on his doctorate, I believe. Yeah, and so he has a very broad background, European studies, economy, politics, history, and he's very interested in participatory movements in government and so on. So naturally, he was the coordinator of the breakout session on politics and government. Well, it was obvious, I didn't say it explicitly, but Nick, of course, citizen initiatives, and Barbara, journalism. And then we have Samuël Fourrep, who is, a biologist, graduated from University of Leuven, is still associated as fellow with the university, is a teacher at the Heilig Hart Institute, one of the people who helped us collecting information from 16, 17-year-olds, and he's even brought two. They are in the audience there. He's the coordinator of Erasmus projects, a very important one, global heating. So this is a collaboration between Flanders, Sweden, Austria, and Italy. And what they do is they visit each other to investigate effects of climate change. So their most recent venture involved measuring how a glacier has shrunk over the last 20 years. And then we have Steven Janssens, who is also a biologist, evolutionary biologist. Those two are friends, actually, and they are involved in a project called Bingo. Nothing to do with bingo, but biodiversity. How does it go again? Inventory for conservation. Bingo. And so Steven was awarded a doctorate from the University of Leuven, is also still associated part-time with the University of Leuven, is very interested in science communication, and is presently working mainly at the Botanical Gardens of Meissen, where they have very valuable plants going back 100 years, and so lending themselves to studying effects of climate change. Now, we were trying to work out a sort of logical order for these coordinators to report about the discussion in the breakout session, and we thought, well, perhaps we can start with Steven, because science communication is so much the source of all this. I will present the proposed order. So first, Steven about science communication, then Barbara about journalism, because you have that very important relation between the two. Then Lorenzo will be talking about how this reaches citizens who can vote and who are concerned about politics and the government. Then Samuël will talk about how all of this hits the young people who are just on the verge of being able to vote but cannot yet vote, education, and then finally we will close with Nick, who will talk about citizens' initiatives in general of all ages. So that's the idea, that's the program, and we will ask everybody to talk for about 5 minutes or so, give a summary of the discussions, and we will again invite reactions from the audience. Steven.
Thank you, Christine. During the breakout session, we were talking about how science communication is actually trying to get the knowledge that was gathered through scientists to the broader public. We had a very heterogeneous group, so a lot of different insights from different kind of fields, so that made it very interesting. First thing that we touched upon was if we talk about communication from a scientific point of view, it's always very pinpointed towards raw data and harsh facts. But in fact, that's not always what people want to hear. And that's also maybe a little bit too in-depth sometimes in order to get some kind of message towards the broader public. And that broader public is not such, let's say, one big happy family as such. It's compiled of, or consists of many different kind of subgroups. And in that sense, it's often very difficult to provide, let's say, one key message that can be understood by those different groups of people. And communication in that way needs to be organized in a way that it can reach all those different groups. But also there's an issue of trying to avoid polarization so that those different groups are in the end joining up together and not becoming each other's opponent in their own, let's say, the information that they sometimes retrieve from what is provided needs to be foreseen in a really clear and sound way so that it's open for everyone and not that they make their own story of it afterwards. So if you talk into metaphors or you do a little bit around the topic, then the communication is as such too vague and people make their own mindset out of it. And I think that's something we discussed very in depth with the group, that it's really important not to lose connectivity with the audience, or we'd say the broader public. How do someone, let's say a scientist which is used to write in papers, very undramatic papers, it's always very dry, it's always just facts and that's about it. But how can we actually as scientists go much further in that in order to, let's say, give a decent communication towards that broader public? And one of the ideas is also that there needs to be some kind of in-between element between the science as facts and also how to get that to the broader public. We had people from communication service and there, for example, it was also mentioned that often there are, let's say, texts are sent to newspapers in order to get a little bit attention, but it's often not picked up. The question is that what could be behind it? Because not every science is important, but sometimes some facts which are challenging to discuss with a broader audience should be actually picked up at some point to provide that information to the broader public. About communication itself, it's something which should be regarded as sporting at a professional level. It's something which takes a lot of skills. It's not something that everyone can do. Scientists, let's say we're not only people that are in a lab coat or behind a bench in the lab, but we also can communicate. But in the Netherlands, for example, there is a tendency to have scientists really thought in how to communicate in a proper way for the broader audience. And this is something which is not always a fact in Belgium. Or in Flanders, there are people that are interested in it, they can follow courses, but it's not an obligation as such. And communication should be clear, it's as if you tell it to your own family, and that is something which, at this particular moment, not every scientist is trained in. But not every scientist should be trained in it as such if there is support, let's say, from a communication service that in each of the academic or global institutes are maybe around. And this is not always the case, for example. I have to check my notes a little bit. Yeah, scientists often scientists also regard themselves, even though the broader public might see them as like the expert on something. But if it comes to climate and climate issues, there's so many different elements involved in it that not, let's say, this cannot be held by one single scientist itself. And if that scientist might exist, maybe he's just not very fond of talking to broader public. But in fact, all these different elements on climate and climate issues, they are touched upon by very many different scientists. Can be people that are working on plants or animals, that working from a geological point of view, or really go into atmospheric science, for example. And often those people don't feel themselves, let's say, in a position to talk about a broad topic as such to broader public, because they also get questions which they cannot answer. And in that sense, it could be interesting also to set up a more in-depth core group of different complementary scientists that can help each other out on how to communicate on these different topics. So that it's not just a single story brought by a single person, but that it's actually something which is carried by a broader base and a broader group of scientists in that. I'm talking too much, am I? I will. Yes, exactly. I think in that sense, it's very important to talk in a way that it's not that the communication is not harsh and it's let's say realistic, but that it's activating in a positive way, being constructive in the end. So not that you get opposites in the end, but that you have people that support each other in their own point of view, but they go together for the same goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, Barbara, the idea was that you go next. Can you connect with some of those points? What came out of your session?
Yeah, I do. Is this working? Hi. Thank you, everyone. And our session was a very lively one. First point is that it was mentioned that telling media how to write and talk is too patronizing and not very realistic. That was just a brief side thought, so that's not going to work. But there are many things that will work, we think. We have a few suggestions. One is invest in science, journalism, education. There's a few postgraduates in journalism in our country, on both sides of our country and here in Brussels. And apparently I gathered that those are sometimes slimmed down and have no or little science journalism in their curriculum, not enough. And particularly the subject we had today, linguistics, the power of words, the importance of words in climate change reporting could really be addressed there, even with guests, teachers like journalists, etc. That could be bulked up or even organized from scratch, where it doesn't exist yet. And according to our participants, it's quite small at the moment or even non-existing. Secondly, we would like to see more media education in education, but I know this exists already, but climate change should be added to it. For instance, learning people from all ages in education, teaching them how the reporting is done, where it comes from, what are the different viewpoints, etc., so that people really have a basic knowledge about this, because there's a lot of tension and even maybe hostility towards scientists and journalists, I must say, more and more. So we could actually invest in that more, but there was a very special and important remark added to this from somebody who is a teacher, saying a lot of our problems in general in our society, we like to put them in education. Education has to solve everything, so that's also true. So that's the broader subject invest in education in general, and then specifically in these kind of subjects, because it's going to become more complex anyway, with the corona, with the pandemic, with climate change. The subject, science and how to understand it, and media and how to understand them, we should really look at that. But please support education in general, because otherwise they cannot solve all these things for us. Then another point which is relevant, we think, different media groups have internal academies. My media group has one as well. It's a course. You can go and have a course once a month or once every 3 months. You can follow something you would like to know about, whether you want to have a technical training or knowing about investigative journalism. We don't know how you could implement it concretely, saying to these academies, these internal academies, to add climate reporting. But I know from the one I have in my company that it's not there. I have no idea whether they receive money for this, but it could be looked at. How could we motivate internal academies at the media houses themselves to add on this to add this subject in their in what they have to offer to our internal journalism. Next is, yes, we notice that, and it's a big, well, it's a bit of a problem, that media are more and more dictated by clicks. And there's many things to say on that, but specifically for the subject of today, we would like to know if it would be possible to have research done on what kind of types of climate reporting work really well and create a lot of engagement online. Because media are very hungry these days to know how can we do really well in the new ecosystem of digital reporting. And so you could cry a lot about the fact that media are under pressure, etc. But we think that maybe we should try and take this as an opportunity, let's say, and provide good scientific information on what could be really interesting to work with in the digital ecosystem. So this is actually a recommendation for academia, more or less. I have 2 last points. We know that the Flemish government is providing finance for innovation in media. Would it be possible to see where this is going to more or less, or could it be possible to stimulate that this goes to also climate reporting and supporting climate reporting education on that? Is that an option at all? I don't know, but it could be interesting to look at that. And then finally, which is a point touched upon by my colleague in the first group, what we really need and what would be interesting to organize is more networking between scientists and journalists. We have a really good example here in Flanders with the Curieuze Neuzen. Projects like that should be possible for climate change as well. That when scientists, reporters get together and really think through how could we make more tangible stories that touch readers and that really talk to them directly. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, next comes Lorenzo with, well, reporting back about politics and government communicating with citizens.
Now it should work. That's better, right?
It does.
Okay. So I would like to report on behalf of the government and policy group. We had an interesting informed discussion with some participants who came from European Commission, Flemish government, and so forth. We came to several conclusions, which I would like to share with you, of course. Maybe a first lesson that we should take into account is that if a government would like to send a message, it would need to acknowledge that there is no such thing as the citizen. We all have a lot of differences. There are a lot of cultural differences between us, a lot of sensibilities. And as a consequence, it is advisable to also segment or to diversify our message towards the specific group that we would like to talk to. Maybe also important is that when we communicate to the population, that we try not to point individuals as being guilty. We are well aware that we are part of a broader system in which we all live and function. So as a consequence, again, it is rather advisable to try and to change the system instead of trying to impose individuals or blame individuals. Sometimes we tend to forget. On the other hand, it is also interesting to note that citizens are more than just a customer. We have a very diverse life in private life and in professional life. We have different roles. Sometimes you are a member of a sports club. On another moment, you are an employee in a big firm. At the end of the day, perhaps you are a mother or a father when you arrive at home. So we all have these different roles, and if we take that into account, it is also crucial, I think, that as a government or as a public organization, that we try to find and try to communicate with these peoples at every moment of the day. So in every role in the life that they play or have. We also had a discussion on the long-term versus the short-term vision of our message that we would like to send out. This is, of course, a trade-off. Everyone, I think there is broad consensus in this room that there is a big need for a long-term vision when it comes to climate change, but that should not be a trap, not to do anything in the next week. So it is probably advisable to have also short-term goals and short-term deliverables, ambitions even, that we would like to see politicians formulate them so that they can try to realize them within their own legislature. Talking about politics then, it is something that we should not underestimate, the influence that political parties have on the public opinion. Most of the time we think that it is the other way around, that the people have an important influence on what political parties do and say, and probably that is also true. But on the other hand, I'm always surprised when I have an informed discussion with even students at university. They always tend to echo the policy positions and even the arguments that political parties formulate in their program and during debates on television and other media channels. So if we know that political parties apparently do have an important say in what people think the next day, it is probably important to also have an efficient lobby mechanism or lobby organization which goes to the source of the public opinion making, namely also the political parties, and tries to address every political party in the field and convince them about the measures to be taken. We talked about Europe as well, because we know that climate change and climate is an important issue at the European level. And we identified an important deliverable there, namely the European Green Deal. And we actually concluded that when we look at the Belgian level, there is no such thing, there is no equivalent. There is no real reference for a party or for a stakeholder in the field to refer to an overarching deliverable such as the European Green Deal. So maybe that is something that we should need in Belgium as well. In the report that we received, there are a lot of facts and figures. There's a lot of output when it comes to daily opinions about daily attitudes of the people. And of course, it is important to a communication strategy that we try to influence these daily opinions. But we should take into account that all our efforts that we invest in trying to change these opinions might be deleted because people change their opinion every day. I personally have shifted my opinion about nuclear power plants in the last few years a couple of times, and maybe I'm not the only one. More important, we believe, is to try and to influence the values that people hold. The more structured opinions, underlying values that people have, such as about sustainability, quality of life. These values are understudied. I can only recall one study in Belgium made by Mr. Callebout and Mr. De Vadder, DNA van Vlaanderen. They, on a longitudinal basis, really mapped the evolution of underlying values among Belgian citizens in the long term. And I believe, or we believe as a group, if we would aim our communication strategy more on influencing those underlying values, for a long-term phenomenon such as climate change, the return on investment could be much bigger instead of influencing daily public opinion. Another thing that we would like to touch upon is the fact that, of course, there is an important task for the government to inform people top-down about climate change. But we should not forget that there is also an important bottom-up movement to be realized if we want to influence or convince people on a broad basis. We, of course, have our activists amongst us, but probably it would need to be a bigger, we call it a social movement, in which we invite more stakeholders than today. So that is something that we would like to see realized. And what we personally did not find in the report, I just read one mentioning of enterprises. So business life, I think, is the elephant in the room that is absent today. Probably, if we would like to tackle a big challenge such as climate change, we need quite a lot of enablers, allowing people to align their behavior with the beliefs that they have. Those enablers are probably also found in corporate life. Probably they have a lot of innovative solutions. And we would like to see them invited in this broader movement to also actively participate and think about solutions to solve this problem. Going towards the end, I think we are almost there. Maybe one more thing to underline is the institutional or the problematic institutional context of this country, which actually hampers the potential for a theme such as climate to move forward. On the one hand, climate is a cross-policy domain issue, so it goes over all policy domains. So you could say we are always involved. In every issue we are involved. On the other hand, as an interdepartmental issue, you are always relying on another person. You are always relying on the person responsible for this one department, energy, mobility, to realize or to implement things. So we are a bit in the middle between if we would formulate a communication strategy, would it be a thematic strategy or a general strategy that encompasses all different departments? That is something that we should think about. Go for a story, for a narrative that try to encompass all policy domains or really focus our message on 1, 2, 3 or individual policy domains and thus not really always telling the whole story, which is very complex. That's it.
Samuël?
Yes, thank you for your attention. We also discussed in our group the recommendations, especially for our field, education. We agreed and disagreed on a lot of things, and I'll try to summarize our reflection in 3 points. And it all starts with passion. How do we evoke passion in our students and through education? How can we evoke not only passion but interest in learning more about climate change? Which language should we use, or which medium should we use? So the storytelling, it was an important thing that we want to emphasize. The storytelling is more important than just bringing the facts only. It needs to be fact-based, of course, but storytelling is important. And we recognize in this that the role, well, it's a difficult story. We need to recognize that it's finding a balance on one hand between the urgency of the problem, which requires us to take action, of course, and through which we seek doom scenarios to tell this, and on the other hand, use positive language, positive signals, and emphasize our ability as humans to cooperate and find solutions in different fields through different methods. So this difficult story, to tell this complex story, how should we tell this? How should we keep students interested in this matter? I think we need to tell this story through education in an honest way, not using doom scenarios, but also not using an all too positive scenario. I think we need to tell this story as a difficult story, as an honest story. How can we make this interesting for our stakeholders? Well, we need to try to make this very concrete, very, not abstract. Of course, it is an abstract story once you tell it, but we need to find ways to tell this in a comprehensive way. This is why I'm very glad my students participate today. They also participated in the questionnaire, and we also discussed this questionnaire. Now, the second point is what we see today when we listen to young people, and this is an important thing because they don't feel listened. They want to know, how can we have a voice? How can people listen to us? I think that's where our story meets your story, the next story. I think in education it is important that students participate in actions, that they learn through experience-based learning. Experience-based learning requires time and money, which is difficult, of course, but I think we need to invest more in education and in experience-based education, through which students can not only listen to the story, but live the story, see what we tell. My students, I went with them to Austria. We visited the glacier. I am sure they will remember our trip to the glacier and their measurements by getting in Austria instead of being in a classroom and me showing some pictures and telling the story. So I think our emphasis should be experience-based learning. And this concludes, of course, my first point, the passion. People protect what they love, Jean-Jacques Cousteau once said. And I think exactly this is what we need. We need role models, female and male role models. We need diversity because we need to agree and disagree. We need to discuss. We need to see that this is a global problem and that in every country, people, young people, older people, are all the same, and we have the same needs and same requirements. But we face the same problem, and we need to tackle this through diversity, using polyphonic language, but also using not one solution, but different solutions. And I think this is where I want to conclude, because this makes the bridge between education and the next group. Let's focus on passion, let's focus on experience the problem and finding a solution together, for which we need language, because this is the only thing how we can communicate, through language, of course.
I wanted to mention, so first you will be reporting about your session, and we will invite questions from the floor, but I will tell you Nick gets an encore, which we will close after all the questions.
Great. I'd like to ask you all one thing, is just to get up for a moment. Just get up from your seat, you two. Okay. Maybe just move around. Okay. Okay. Can you feel the difference between sitting down and standing up? Already in our brains, scientists have really measured the fact that we kind of close down. You can now go sit down, and you can feel the difference now and like 10 seconds ago. We just woken up again because of moving just a little bit. So thinking is really important, talking is really important, moving is even better. And that's where it's true, experience-based learning and experience-based doing and even talking should be, and words should lead to action, as the Bard told us. And this is where our group came in, because we talked about citizen movements, which has movement in it. I had a wonderful session with wonderful ladies, some of them PhDs in Ghent and Brussels and stuff. It was magnificent. So hard to summarize, but let's start with where also you left off, that we could be more than just consumers. Often we're told that, okay, we can vote more than once every 4 years. We can vote every day with our wallet and buy eco-fashion, like Barbara is studying, or be more conscious about water preservation, which is what Stefania is doing. And as consumers, we can be more powerful, and we are more powerful than we think. But it's exactly like you said, we have so many different roles, and one of them is being a citizen, and only being talked to as a consumer is sometimes has the danger of leaving out that responsibility that we can do so much more. So then it's interesting that for example, Freya was studying the climate movement and the climate marches that we've had, and there, tell me if I'm quoting you correctly, right? From January 2019 to now, we've seen that the Gretas, the Anunas, the Luisas in Germany, etc., have become real voices in the public debate, more than all those nice little girls, or those nasty little girls, or those annoying girls. Their words are really taken into account. They're really valid partners in the debate. And if Antonio Gutierrez and David Attenborough, etc., tell us that we wouldn't be at the outcome of COP26 without all those climate marches, we better know that this is real. Their words have really mattered. And the movement, of course, has mattered so much more. But what was really interesting when we then started to talk about, well, the dichotomy, of course, in society, and the polarization that these marches and these girls have brought about, that in both language and in the movement, it will be so important to go for a collective identity and try to find that again. What unites us? What makes us we again? And how can we find terms, because that's what we're here to talk about what kind of language can unite us again. Will it be words that we haven't invented yet? Will it be words like sustainable? Is sustainable left or right? Is it progressive or conservative, or can we say that we can all get behind it? What could be the words that, or the slogans, and I'm coming back to what I referred to earlier, that we can devise to make everyone follow that? And for example, that's what in the song we devised, Do It Now, we thought about for a long time is we need to build a better future. Okay, is anyone against building a better future? No. So we have this we feeling again that's going to be really crucial. Interesting was also that in science communication, they said, okay, but as science communicators, should we then also be activists or should we be neutral? And that tying into the lady who was over there as a scientist said, we should be more activist, and at the same time, the conflict is probably if you get too activist, well, you kind of lose your your scientific raison d'être. How to solve the whole problem of polarization is knowing what connects us. Is like, for example, in this country, 78% of the people are on board with human-induced climate change. That's not going to be the problem. So then how could we build on that to make sure that the tipping point of the people who are activist about it can be the tipping point for people who actually also want to take action. And what was really interesting, going back to education, then Stefania did research on ecological behavior. How can we induce that in schools? And one of the interesting things is that we found out where we would normally go from grown-ups to children, from the parents to their offspring. Reverse socialization actually does the reverse and starts with the children, who then educate their parents. And I think more people have talked about that. It's often now young people who are so much wiser also about what we could do to preserve our planet. So also they're preparing for my encore. You don't know yet, but if I can give you one takeaway on how I think that a mass movement can be built, is with this very negative doom and gloom story that we're gonna have to tell anyway, as honest as we can, we still should find a positive form. And why not even a fun form, which then tries to talk to as many people as possible, and where you actually find children, for example, as the secret weapon to get their parents to, in this case, sing along. And that's why I've kind of wrenched Christian and Marie's hand. I said, in this academic world where we're always blah, blah, blah talking, we should do something, and you should show people what can work. And Sing for the Climate is based on finding the right words in the right song for the right people. And then it was children inducing their parents to sing along, reverse socialization. I'm just leading up to my own stuff. It's horrible, but it's how all came together also in our group, where, and that's the final thought. We were also thinking, how can we involve, of course, Global South, etc. And what we've seen with even people in our country experiencing harm and catastrophes, etc. If so many people go and help out with the people in Liège and the floods that we've had, it's so important to also kind of it's what you say, right? Have this movement be the motor of change, and these small steps that we were talking about is what we'll be trying to induce all the time. That's more or less what we talked about, right? And I want to thank my wonderful group and you all.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Barbara, Leonardo, Samuel, Stephen. 5 minutes for questions from the audience. Again, we've run out of time a bit, but we certainly want to hear your reactions. Yes?
I have a short question. The word activism already has fallen several times. I was talking to you also, Kjersti, because you were mentioned in the Scotland by Senator Starks as doing mild activism for sort of science, human and science and activity. I think we should redefine activism as being something positive, something motivating, and then hello. And then the other part of activism, I would call it protestatism or protest something, because if we want to do something, we want to get movement, and if it is too negative protest, you never can engage somebody. You will never engage somebody to get the vaccine when you go do it the negative way, for example. Voilà. That.
Yep, Barbara, sure.
Is this hello? Yeah, I'm not an activist, but I want to just mention something that might be relevant for the linguists. I recently interviewed a scientivist, a scientist, a climate scientist who calls himself also an activist, and for him it's absolutely logical. It's absolutely unproblematic. He did have a few negative reactions at the beginning, but he says, if I cannot, on this subject, speak out and be less neutral than I have to be in my papers, then I'm losing my not my life, but I mean my purpose. So this is just as a in between brackets.
I'd like to just add, is a firefighter, is that an activist? He would never say I'm an activist, he's just, but if he's not active and would be inactive...
Well, I think you need a protest,
then
but maybe you need more firefighters for a huge fire, and then you activate other people to help to solve the problem.
Yep, this question. Yep, that back.
I was a bit puzzled by the suggestion that we need to change people's values. I mean, values are typically very deeply held. It's very difficult to change people's values. But what you can do is you can appeal to different values of people. If someone's very religious, Catholic, you may point out to the papal encyclical. If they're Protestant, you may tell them that God gave this world for humans to take care of. If someone's a romantic, you may point out that this beautiful nature is at risk of disappearing. If someone's a scientist, you may point out to, and so on and so on. I could multiply the examples. So I think you cannot honestly change people's values in any significant way, certainly not in a short time, but you can appeal for the same purpose, the same objective, to deeply held values that different people have, each in their own way, so that they can come together, each with their own perspective, and work towards a common goal.
If I may react to that, I think probably you are right, and probably we are trying to convince ourselves about the same thing at the moment. Changing values, according to research, is possible. There is research about the 20-year time frame For example, sustainability. I think 20 years ago, I would still throw my banana peel as a cyclist next to the road. Today I won't do it anymore. Not because my daily opinion has changed, but because it is entrenched in my whole life these days. That some things are taken care of and some things last longer than other things. New knowledge was imported last years. So it's how you see it, but I would say that changing or influencing values is more sustainable and more long-term than trying to influence or appealing to opinions or trying to change opinions. I was merely trying to point out the difference between opinions and values. And the question is, what do we want to invest in? And concerning the activists, we had a nice suggestion in our group. It was called climate engagement. I think it's about the connotation, right? Activism has a negative connotation, but if you are engaged in something, it's a positive connotation.
Okay, well, it's actually time to close off this session, and I would propose we first close off the event verbally, and then right at the end we will have Nick's encore. So, well, you know, just in a few words, very many thanks to all of you who came, to our speakers, breakout session coordinators, panel members. I think we can all say we have felt engagement, honesty, earnestness. This hasn't been a cut and dried academic session. It's been one of real encounter, I think. And this is thanks to all of you. So very many thanks, and Anne-Marie will continue with specific thanks and close off the session, and then we will have a little moment of celebration.
Yes, the specific thanks here go first of all to the Academy. I see that the permanent secretary is still present, and we have felt throughout the organization of this program an enormous enthusiasm and support in all kinds of ways from the board, from the members of the Academy, from the president, from the permanent secretary, who's always encouraged us enormously, and it has been very, very important to us. There has also been, of course, the financial support, the use of the buildings, everything, the organization, everything. Thank you very much. There is the staff of the Academy. We owe a big, big thanks to Inès Duas, to Nathalie Boelens, to Chris Brosset, and to Sophie Zeutz. I want to mention them personally because without them it would not have been possible. They were always there when we came up with, you know, last-minute requests. Usually they'd already thought of that before us. They were always 1 or 2 steps in front of us. And always with a smile. Efficiency, competence, and with a smile. Thank you very much, and I'd like a big applause to them as well. And of course, yes, last but not least, the thinkers, Kjersti and Mike. We feel extremely fortunate that we have found you so enthusiastic, so engaged, a word which has been used here a couple of times, so engaged from the very start. You didn't know us, you didn't know Flanders, we knew some of your work, so we trusted that you would bring this to an excellent end, but we couldn't have imagined that you would have done it in such a brilliant way. In such a short time, because I think we started in February, was it? April, sorry. And then, of course, it was not in residence because of COVID-19 situation. It all had to be online. The correspondence with you was amazing. We always got an email back right away. 5 minutes later, there was Mike, there was Kjersti. Communication was fantastic. And so, yes, maybe have I forgotten something important? Thank you very much to both of you again. The permanent secretary, vastsekretaris, wants to say something.
It's not that the permanent secretary always wants the last word. It's just we already had the opportunity to thank a number of people for this successful Thinker program. But there are, of course, 2 people that we may not forget. And that's Christine Davidse and Annemarie van den Bergen, who really did a wonderful job. Very enthusiastic and very competent, even making some innovations in the process and so on. So on behalf of the Academy, I'm going to give you a small present. And in the meantime, I hope that you will all give a warm applause to Christine and Annemarie.